Okay. Good evening, everyone. Am I audible to the audience? So this is Professor Priyan, Dean of the Faculty of Computing, 𝗘𝗶𝗃𝗰𝗁𝕗 University of Sri Lanka, and Vice Chair of IEEE Sri Lanka section, who is going to serve as the moderator of this webinar, Shaping the Future, Policies for Generative AI in Sri Lankan Higher Education. It is great pleasure to see so many esteemed colleagues, university administrators, professors, experts, industry members, academic professionals, and students gathered here to discuss such a pivotal and transformative topic. This panel discussion is organized by the General Research Committee and the Section E3 Computer Science of SLAS, International Conference on Advanced Research in Computing, collaborating with IEEE Sri Lanka section, IEEE Computer Society Sri Lanka chapter, SLAS, 𝗘𝗶𝗃𝗰𝗁𝘁𝗶𝗃𝗃 chapter, and the Learn. Let me give a background of this webinar. As you know, since the release of OpenAI, popular chatbot back in November 22, this technology has sparked, especially the academic community. As a result of this generative AI, the educational landscape by transforming just-in-case learning into the just-in-time learning. Therefore, the generative AI has become not just a tool, but also a collaborator in the art of creative expression, accelerated content creation, and the enhanced scientific research. If you look at Sri Lanka as a Sri Lankan government, also looking at taking their responsibility of AI development and utilization, aiming to foster a digitally empowered society by a national AI strategy. I am sure that it was proposed last year, this year, March 2024. When I go through those proposals, I see some of the panel members presented here, also part of this initiative. So it will be very nice for the audience for more interactive session. Before this webinar, I just had a go exploration what is happening with this GenAI. So I looked at the Google Trends, and I see that the way how look at ChatGPT is used extensively. So I classified according to the cities. So when I look at these cities clustered, you see most of these cities, each and every higher education institute is located around the country, right? So the ranking of and the percentage of usage of ChatGPT is highly mentioned here. So that clearly making an evidence that the adaptation of AI technology in the universities are very much useful, and it's used. So in that case, the universities also have begun considering policies and guidelines to address this new development. This poses an ever great challenge for academic administrators in the higher education sector, particularly from a quality assurance perspective. So we always talk about QA. So today we are here to engage in discussion and explore the positive and negative impact of integrating AI and generative AI into higher education, especially focusing on the policy aspect of it. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished panel members. Now let me introduce the panel members. Senior Professor Ashoka Karunaananda from Faculty of Information Technology, University of Moratuwa, Dr. Asitha Bandaranayake, Senior Lecturer from University of 𝗘𝗶𝗰𝗵 and representing Learn, Professor Nuwan, Godagoda, Vice Chancellor SLIT, Dr. Thushari Silva, Senior Lecturer from University of Moratuwa and representing SLI, Dr. Menaka Ranasinghe, Senior Lecturer from Open University of Sri Lanka, Dr. Mrs. Vishaka Nanayakkara from University of Senior Lecturer from University of Moratuwa and representing Learners here, Professor Ragel, from Professor from University of 𝗘𝗶𝗃𝗰𝗁, representing Learn, Dr. KPN Jayasena. Actually, we want to bring an outsider. from 𝗘𝗱𝘂𝘂𝘂𝗃, Germany, but former academic member of the Faculty of Computing, 𝗣𝗵𝗔 University, Sri Lanka. Thank you for presenting here today to share your valuable insights and expertise. We are excited to learn from your experience and perspectives on how generative AI can revolutionize higher education in Sri Lanka. So without further ado, let's move to today's agenda. The overall plan is as follows. So first, we will be giving an introduction about generative AI and its potential in higher education. Then we will move on to the panel discussion where our esteemed panel will discuss the opportunities and limitations of GenAI in different aspects of higher education. Then we will get expert opinions about the policy implications of GenAI in these different aspects before moving to the concluding remarks. Meantime, there are two announcements as well. While the panel discussion is on the way, I invite the participants to post your questions in the Q&A box in the bottom. You might see that. At the same time, the panelists are covering the questions already asked in the registration time by the participants in their presentations. Some people, when we requested to ask few questions, so those are also covered. So participants will be more happy about that as well. To start the proceedings, I am pleased to invite Professor Roshan Ragel to provide the big picture view of generative AI and its impact on higher education. Over to you, Professor Roshan.
Thank you, Priyan, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for showing an overwhelming interest in this topic, something that is part of the discussion these days. So I'm going to just quickly cover how generative AI in higher education, specifically education and research, the opportunities that we have and the challenges that are expected or we are facing, and why we had to have a discussion on policies. So that is my next few minutes. So just to take a step back and look at, we are talking about generative AI, where AI is part of it. So artificial intelligence, AI, is not new. Although the term was coined somewhere in 50s, but enigma, the AI discussion started. And so there's the Turing test and so on. And we are at a stage now where we are talking about the generative AI as opposed to discriminative or predictive AI. So where we are overwhelmed by the number of tools and the techniques that are being introduced. So just to again look at where the generative AI comes into the whole AI picture. So AI as a big picture. On top of it, we also have a lot of data coming in and data science coming along the way. And with data science, big data, artificial intelligence going into machine learning, where you go from algorithms to use machines, so to make learning with data, moving on to neural networks, deep learning, and we are at now a stage of generative AI. So the generative AI, although we just generally call it AI, it's just a very sub-domain of the whole AI ecosystem. So what generative AI does is, like I mentioned earlier, it's as opposed to the predictive or discriminative AI that we are using for a long time. Generative AI generates new content from input. We call them prompts. So it can generate various type of output from the text input. Our prompts can be text, audio or video. It can be images. It can even be programs or code. So it can do all that. This is a graph taken from contextual AI. So they're talking about how generative AI, just AI, including generative AI, has reached human performance in terms of an average human performance and the best state-of-the-art AI technology. So we started long back with predictive AI or discriminative in 1990s. figuring out how AI or programs can identify handwriting recognitions, things that are written by human, can machines identify them? Went from there to speech, images, and so on. Somewhere closer to late 2010, 2015, 16. In fact, some of these state-of-the-art software or AI has overtaken the average human performance. Handwriting recognition, you can see here, or the speech, even reading comprehension, right? So how good an AI tool can read and comprehend what is written. And we have gone beyond, and we are now talking about common sense completion, even something that is as challenging as graduate school maths, code generation, like I was showing in the example a little while ago. So a decent number of human tasks that are considered intelligent, human can do. Now AI, and particularly now in the current era with the generative AI taking over. So with this opportunity, some tools coming in and the technology that is coming in and taking roles or performance as good as human in those aspects, how can we use this as an opportunity is what we want to discuss. At the same time, if you also want to take a step back and think about how human technology evolved, and we usually talk about industrial revolution. So industrial revolution is not just about industry, but about the way how human live or do their business, right? So we started Industrial Revolution 1, where the machines come into picture, steam engine, and so on. But in the latest Industrial Revolution, AI is the latest Industrial Revolution, 4 plus or 4 or 5, is not discussed without the context of AI. AI is one of the most important aspects of the latest Industrial Revolution, and therefore it is something that we all had to live with and also understand and use, similar to how we started using machines or mechanical or electricity in the third Industrial Revolution and so on. So that's another aspect of the human life. So let me just quickly take a few minutes to discuss the opportunities in education. Opportunities, obviously, if we don't have opportunities with something like AI technology, there's no reason for a discussion even. Like if it's only challenges, if there's no opportunity. Obviously, there are enough and more opportunities. We'll start with something big, right? So we wanted to, with technology, can we reimagine the way how we do education, teaching, learning? I'll ask that with the question, can everyone learn or everybody learn? In other words, I used to ask the same question in a different way, whether all our students, all the learners get an A grade when they are evaluated or assessed. The answer to this question was given in a study that was done in 1980s by the famous Benjamin Bloom in the study called the 𝗘𝗱𝘂𝗰 study, or the 𝗘𝗱𝗂𝗰 problem as defined. What the study says is that if you do, if you look at a conventional classroom with one teacher and 30 students, you get a normal distribution of performance. If you do a one-to-one tutoring, which is also can be considered as personalized learning, the performance improved by 2 sigma. What it means in terms of numbers is, if you have 100 students, if you do one-to-one tutoring, 90 students out of the 100 will get the top performance of like the 20 students earlier. In other words, if you do a one-to-one tutoring compared to a conventional education, almost all the students, 97 plus students, will get better performance than the average students in a conventional class. So that gives a lot of hope for educators to support personalized education. The problem was in the 2 sigma study is that although it is well and good, one-to-one tutoring was never possible since in the 80s or even a little later. However, with technology, things like the chatbots that can teach or engage with learners one-to-one, this is becoming possible. Here's an example from the Khan Academy's Khan Migo. that does something similar. So the same is true for teachers, not just for students, but teachers can also use these tools for preparing lesson plans and various other aspects, understanding student feedback and so on. And in terms of teachers, what a study identified is that if you use things like generative AI to various part of their task, it's possible to bring down or increase their student engagement by 20 to 30%. So student engagement with so AI coming in, the concern on one side is, okay, will students be just using machines and learn? But the idea here is, okay, can we bring AI and make teachers reallocate some time that they use otherwise with doing other things like preparation work or admin work, and spend more time with students. So that's another opportunity. More opportunities are in the line of how students learn, how learners learn, and the different ways of their learning, the different phases, different speed at which they learn. All that can be accommodated with the technology. There's, like I said at the beginning, this technology has its own challenges, as we understand, and that is the reason why we are discussing this. Starting from academic fairness, unequal access, digital literacy, digital divide, and can these tools be academically, using these tools enable fairness, or can all at least maintain fairness? There are other challenges, like we over-rely on technology when we start with technology. However, challenges like over-reliance can only be eliminated by giving access to the tools and also making this making that learning curve or the Dunning-Kruger effect established. There are other concerns like privacy. As you know, there are cases already, and also there are situations where things like the Google was fined in the Europe and so on. So these things are also happening. And one other aspect is the plagiarism aspect, right? So in fact, like as you all would understand, plagiarism is defined as taking somebody else's, right? So some person's authorship and claiming it as your own. However, now with the technology, with AI, although there are tools that are coming in to identify such challenges, there are more challenges with such tools as well. For example, one of the challenges with such tools is here, on one hand, these tools identify non-native speakers as AI. On the other hand, if you can fine-tune the tool properly, like if you use the tool, AI generator properly, we can also easily circumvent or avoid getting flagged as plagiarized. So this is a paper released in 2013 that studied the same aspect. So with that, what I expected to do in the next few minutes is let's discuss how we can reimagine education, where everybody can learn. Obviously, there are challenges and opportunities, but we wanted to, that is where we wanted to bring in some guardrails, policies, or guiding principles that can help educators and the education administrators to shape the future, and here also in Sri Lanka. That's the whole idea of this discussion. And thank you for listening and the time. Priyan, over to you.
Thanks, Professor Ragel. That was extremely informative and inspiring. Let's hope that we can fulfill those visions in the future. So now let's move on to the rest of the panelists to discuss specific areas of interest. In the first part of the panel discussion, we will focus on the opportunities and challenges in those specific areas. Right? To start with, I would like to talk with Vishaka ma'am. So Professor Ragel mentioned about the necessity to have policies or guiding principles. I have two related questions to you. Where do the policies begin? Or why not a policy would be needed? And in the absence of policies, can you explain how an academic can effectively use generative AI to empower students on behalf of the students and for the other organization level? Over to you, Vishaka ma'am.
Thank you, Professor Priyan. answering your question of where do policies emanate from, as most of us are academics, I would urge you to think about how and when the other policies around us came into place. Acceptable use policy, or the AUP, or simply IT policy, is something that I have seen getting drawn up in early stages of my career as an academic. This would remind you the chicken and egg problem. We started using IT resources long before our universities came up with IT policies. The policies emanated when we fully understood what we use and why we use technology. I think when you understand the policy vacuum, policies will come into play. In order to understand or create that vacuum, we need to use those related technologies. In my view, same would happen with generative AI. Next, please. For GenAI policy formulation, there are various guidelines available. This document, the QR code would lead you to it, is from UNESCO. Can we move on to next? The one thing to take into heart in all these policy formulation is that guidelines are emphasizing on developing AI competencies, including generative AI related skills for the learners. Next, please. So if it is UNESCO or this one, again, the QR code would take you to the full document, is from World Economic Forum. The key concepts are the same. And if you look at the things coming from various, next slide, please, Roshan. Next slide, yeah. The Russell Group, which we are very familiar with, the UK group of eminent universities, has emphasized on the need to adopt generative AI in the universities. Next, please. If you look at, I really like this learning of the descriptions given here, right? AI tools, incorporating the use of generative AI tools into teaching methods and assessment has the potential to enhance the student learning experience, improve critical reasoning skills, and prepare students for the real-world applications of the generative AI technologies, which they would encounter beyond university. Once again, the QR code would take you to the entire document. So if you look at, there are like all these different need for using generative AI. Next slide, please. We understand this need for using generative AI, but this takes me back to a dilemma that I always had as a teacher. We always strive to be fair, treat all students the same, not to favor anyone, not to treat anyone differently. But is that equality fair? Should we be more equitable? Should we have more equitable treatment? Roshan talked about individualized, personalized learning. So maybe even to not just to give equitable treatment, but even to liberate, to just allow everybody to see everything possible, perhaps would be what we want to do. Next slide, please. So with all these, let me tell you about something we did, as Priyan said, in the absence of policies. What can an academic do? Something simple. So with us understanding the need for using generative AI and being able to be more equitable in our teaching learning process, answering your second question, let me share something that we did at the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, University of Murtu. I'll very briefly explain this. Next slide, please. I teach communication skills for a second year class, and in the how to give them feedback, right? My class size is 200. We try to help them by getting various Moodle workshop, the Zoom breakout rooms, all that. But in the era of before at GPT, next slide, please. So we wanted to give them a chance of doing some free writing. when the ChatGPT came, we knew that they were starting to use this, and their responses were varying. They were having no language problems. They were using ChatGPT, straight ChatGPT responses, modified ones, and all that. But what we did, next slide, please. What we did was we gave them a free writing. We asked them to make sure that we didn't talk about LLMs, but they used LLMs. So we used this opportunity to talk about pros and cons in using LLMs. And they improved. The no internet access proctored exam showed us that the LLMs have really helped them doing better. Next, Myla, right, perhaps? Yeah, so I would say what we need to do is to not teach them facts, but train their minds to take quoting Albert Einstein. Next slide. I think not only these LLMs would not only help us justice, but also allowing for the inclusion of the students. Thank you. Over to you, Priyan.
Thank you, Vishaka ma'am. It's really quite thought-provoking. And when I see here, I think about something called personalized learning. I mean, you try to bring that fact over here. And especially I thinking that key benefits of using generative AI in education is mentioned as personalized learning. So let me move to Dr. Menaka. How can generative AI be used to create personalized learning experiences that cater to individual learner needs? And also, what are the challenges you see in doing so? Dr. Menaka, are you around?
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Priyan. As you very clearly said, personalized learning is a dire requirement of present learners given their dynamic requirements, such that individual student needs, preferences, and abilities are accommodated. Next slide, please. All right, thank you. Yeah, Professor Roshan nicely laid the foundation for personalized learning. We all know that personalization is not a practical and a feasible task in the recent past, given a large cohort of students. But now, the power of GenAI can be harnessed to create personalized learning experiences that enhance engagement and motivation, and achieve improved learning outcomes by addressing each learner's unique challenges and strengths. Next slide. To develop personalized learning paths, we need to know what are the learner characteristics. Basically, that is learner profiling. There are several methods for profiling considering characteristics. For example, sentiment analysis is based on examining emotional cues in text or speech. Then AI assesses learners' motivation and engagement. If a student expresses frustration in their responses, AI can alert the teacher or offer motivational prompts to keep the student engaged. By combining these outcomes of these methods, AI can create personalized learning paths. For example, if a student excels in visual learning but struggles with text-based content, AI might recommend more video tutorials and interactive simulations. Next slide, please. Let's look at some of the practical examples because they are around us. You heard about intelligent tutoring systems. Let's see what adaptive learning platforms are. They use algorithms to modify content and assessments based on real-time performance. Natural language processing tools like chatbots can offer personalized feedback and answer questions, simulating a human tutor. I'm sure many of you may have used Grammarly. It is also a GenAI tool that provides personalized feedback on writing, helping users to improve their grammar and style based on their unique writing patterns. Next slide. Okay, now we got to know many things about the present landscape of personalized learning. So what we can expect in the future. There will be more advanced AI-driven educational tools that are more accessible, ensuring that students from diverse backgrounds can benefit. We can expect deeper integrations with virtual and augmented reality, creating immersive and interactive learning environments. Data analytics will enable even more precise personalizations by adapting to evolving needs of learners over time, and the systems will enhance performance by integrating feedback loops. Therefore, it is very clearly evident that GenAI holds the potential to transform education, making it more engaging, effective, and accessible for everyone. Next slide, please. Given all these advantages, we have to address many challenges as well. Data privacy and security are major concerns. Personalized learning relies on collecting and analyzing student data, which are sensitive. And we need to, if bias is accommodated in AI algorithms, they might create wrong learning paths. Therefore, we need to develop implementation of AI-driven personalized learning systems can be costly as well. Next slide. Then how can we mitigate these challenges? Implementing strong encryption protocols for data, both at rest and in transit. Implementing role-based access control, ensuring that the training data for AI models is diverse and representative of the population are few steps that we can take. Forming partnerships with academic institutions or participating in industry consortia can provide access to cutting-edge research and shared resources to reduce the cost. So, in conclusion, I would like to emphasize that GenAI provides many avenues for personalized learning, including special need learners as well. Further, it is required to appropriately address the challenges adhering to ethical considerations. Thank you. Over to you, Prof. Priyan.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Menaka. So now this is very insightful. Now my question is towards go beyond the personalized learning. Let me move to Dr. Thushari. She's waiting to tell us how generative AI enhance the learning experience for learners and how this supports diverse learning needs and styles. Thushari.
Thank you very much, Professor Roshan. And it's a timely, relevant idea that we do need to talk more about it. So first, when we talk about the education, we often think about the challenges. Overcrowded classrooms, standardized tests that leaves a little room for our creativity, and one-size-fits-all approach that fail to accommodate the diverse ways of our students learn and their levels. And imagine a classroom where all students' potential is fully realized. And the education is not just a process where we write everything on the board and study and come for the examination, but it's a journey where we can discover more and improve ourselves, generate creativity, and we will be able to develop ourselves. So having said that, let's move to the next slide. How this marvelous technology like generative AI transform our learning environment that we have never thought before. So imagine whatever the field you are coming from, maybe a medical domain, or maybe science and technology domain, or maybe social science domain, or you want to become a marketer one day. So whatever the discipline you are coming from, so there's no boundary for you. The generative AI is capable enough to deliver what do you want to see in your learning environment. So powerful tools are like dynamic interactive learning materials that you could deliberate. And even the educators or the practitioners or lecturers involved in this education discipline So they can create these virtual lab sessions, simulations, just give the hands-on experience for the educators or the learners. And using these VR techniques, they could say what they need to say in a lab. So when it comes to this sort of value creation generated through the generative AI technologies, so your boundaries are widely open. So you can have the hands-on experience, which were difficult for you to go and do in practical. For an example, think about an explosive application or explosive chemical reaction that you couldn't test in a lab, but generative AI tools will facilitate that requirement for you. And if I go to the next slide, you will be able to see other definite values which generative AI could bring in. Now think about you want to practice for a defense and debate scenarios, whereas the students' defenses as well as the opposed viewpoints are tested. So you can think you have a GenAI application or the assistant. So you can post your idea, arguments, and GenAI tool will be the opponent. So it gives you more boundaries for you to break out, and then it will give more horizons and more opportunities for you to think about, more aspects to learn about. So this form of active participations could never be happening in our traditional classroom environment. So this definitely open up and bring more opportunities for you to practice. It's available 24/7. So it is another assistant tool. It's not a replacement for an educator, but it helps you to develop your critical thinking skills plus analysis skill. So, and the questions you ask totally determined by the knowledge level you are having, but it will be improved with the answers they are generating. And you need to analyze, critically analyze basically, and then get the idea whether it's right or wrong, and you may improve your ideas accordingly. This definitely brings more challenges to our assessment strategies. So this will be opening up new way of looking at our students. So how do we accommodate all the creativity skills in our assessment strategies? Definitely, this demands us to increase our assessment bars. So it is important to prepare students for future, and they will be coming into different professions and coming from different disciplines. So as educators, as students, we need to be well aware of what sort of technologies will improve your various boundaries. So it's important for us to keep our eyes on how to adapt these technologies and use them as our assistants. And having said that, so this definitely open up our barriers and convert our traditional classrooms into a very sophisticated and interesting arena. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's extremely enlightening, Thushari, to hear how generative AI supports diverse learning needs and styles. Once again, I invite the participants to post your questions in the Q&A box. Our panelists are already addressing your submitted questions one by one. Now, once these learning things are happening, especially teaching and learning are incomplete without the assessment part. Let me get to Professor Nuwan Godagoda. Nuwan, what opportunities and challenges are introduced by generative AI into assessments? Can the assessment still be authentic?
Thank you, Professor Priyan. So let me actually talk about assessments. And I think we all know how important assessments are. Students are assessment driven. So if you set up assessments properly, then they actually do the learning. Next slide, please. So let me show you this framework. So this is a fairly famous framework now. This is called the Artificial Intelligence Assessment Scale. And this actually looks at how assessments can be set in today's context. Before ChatGPT came in November 2022, well, we didn't have to worry about students using AI for their assignment submissions. We only had to worry about plagiarism. Now, this particular scale goes where we as academics expect students not to use AI at all, to the point where they can actually fully use AI. So I think in most of our courses, the traditional courses that we have, we may not actually allow students to use AI, but there are instances that we have seen where in some of the courses where you find that lecturers actually allow students to use AI, but then they may need to maybe cite what they are using. So I'll actually share with you some of the examples and the challenges that are there in setting up assessments. So if you go to the next slide. So this was the way that we did earlier, pre-ChatGPT, but now it's almost impossible. So if you ask students that they cannot use AI and you ask them to do a take-home assignment, actually there are tools. There are for example, Turnitin also can do AI detection, but it is not 100% foolproof. So there are certain false positives that are there. So it's very stressful for academics if you try to set up assignments this particular way. So we look at some other examples. Next slide, please. So we have seen in some universities where they have actually even looked at the changes that are happening in the job market and looking at how to change assessments and what to assess between students. So here is one example from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology for a writing course, where the academics have identified that the items listed here are the future-proof skills of English writing. And one of the things that you kind of notice, like when lecturers actually try to bring in AI and allow students to use AI, we see that if you take the second point, they actually look at these metacognitive skills of the student and try to see how that particular assignment has evolved over time rather than evaluating an end product. So in this particular assignment submission, if it was done traditionally, we would ask the student to do some work and then submit it, and then we would evaluate the final submission. But now we have seen when lecturers try to incorporate these kinds of assessments where students can use AI tools, you have basically a kind of like a life cycle of the development of the assignment. So you can see here, like initially students have to come up with a proposal, then there is some peer review, and this goes on, and the lecturer and the tools provide feedback right throughout. And if you go to the next slide. So I want to show you something that's happening. This is actually a screenshot from Turnitin. We all know Turnitin. So this is actually a future design concept, and they are working on this. This is currently going to go at beta testing, where they will actually allow you to see how a document submission made by a student evolves over a period of time. Currently, Turnitin only looks at the final submission, and then it tells you about similarity and maybe AI checking. But now they have also realized that it's not possible to just only check the final submission of a student, but rather look at the process, and it can actually tell you certain things like, how many, what part of the text has been copy pasted. So it goes to the entire life cycle from beginning to end. And this is kind of something that we see in the future tools that are being developed. So if you go to the next slide. Now, one of the other things is, if you take foundational skills, we see that there is more prominent towards having in-class invigilated exams. So this is something that we see possibly like, in first year level kind of like assessments. Next slide, please. So I want to share with you some screens from a design course conducted by Hong Kong Polytechnic University. So these two, one done by Professor Roberto and the other one by Dr. Kitty. So these are actually level 5 level courses where students are totally encouraged to use AI. The first one is actually a design course where students have been asked to develop a poster, and they were asked to use Midjourney, and they were taught how to use Midjourney to develop their solution. And in the second one, this is for a fashion design course where once again Midjourney and Stability AI was used, and the students were taught about Stability AI and also Midjourney, and they used these tools completely end to end to develop their solutions. Now, in this particular case study, when we actually asked these resource people on the kind of students that they worked on, the fashion design course was actually for a master's level course, and Professor Roberto's course was also for more advanced students. So we see that these kinds of GenAI tools being used for more like final years programs and as well as master's level programs. But I actually asked them, how would you kind of like teach first year students like design and concepts like that? But what they told us was like, they would use traditional paper and pencil when it comes to design, creating design artifacts, because they need to develop those core skills as foundational skills. And maybe like later on when they are in the 3rd year, 4th year, or maybe at master's level, we could incorporate GenAI in a design kind of program. Next slide, please. So one of the other things that I noted was like they actually taught the students how to use these tools. That might be very important where students are really taught about the specific tools that they have to use, like in this case, stability diffusion, or maybe it is Midjourney. Next slide. So I also want to show you 2 other cases where I think we have seen courses using GenAI. One is like we have seen in situations where the learning outcome maybe like, let's say it's an engineering module. So maybe there's an assignment in engineering module where students have to use mathematical formula. So mastery of mathematics is not a learning outcome of a certain course, maybe a certain engineering course. But in those kinds of courses, maybe we can allow students to use GenAI because that is not part of the learning outcome. And also the other thing is like when it comes to high-stake evaluation. Now, for example, now if you take a project in the 1st year and a project in the final year, now final year projects are very important, and probably you need to have maybe a set of professors evaluating you, having a 𝗣𝗏. And although you may have a project in the 1st year, maybe the evaluation doesn't have to be that strong. So these are some examples of how assessments have evolved with the introduction of GenAI. Over to you, Professor Priyan.
Thank you, Professor Nuwan. It's really insightful response you have given regarding the challenges and also the way how other foreign engineers in universities have assisted students using generative tools for assessments and implications as well. The one even important question in our academic life is about research, So let's move to the research oriented topic. For this, actually, I invited Dr. Pubudu Jayasena. So Pubudu, how did you approach research paper preparation and peer review process using generative AI? It will be very insightful from your answer.
Yes, thank you, Professor Priyan. Okay, so first go to the next slide. Actually, in here that how the Gen AI that we can use for the research. So there are different phases, mainly research conception and execution phase. Actually, for the literature review and the brainstorming stage and the research dissemination stage. Okay, publication stage and the research translation. That means if you want to give the output for the research for the patent base, so this stage and the research funding and the compliance stage. So those 4 stages we can use generative AI. So in this domain, I am not going to discuss about what kind of tools that we can use for each and every stage. I think now most of you are aware of what the tools, GenAI tools that can use in the literature review and the writing and those tasks. I am going to discuss about the best practices for research when we are using generative AI. Go to next slide, please. Under there, that here that AI research that the preprint that published in May 2023, they examined that the 100 publishers and 100 journals found that 17% of the publishers and the 70% of the journals had released their guidelines. Okay, all the guidelines, they discuss about whether AI can be an author or co-author, whether generative AI tools for writing, editing, formatting, assistant, how can we use, and how can we use generated figures, and what are the peer reviews and what are the policies. Okay, now we'll discuss one by one. So the next slide, I will discuss about whether can in here. So in this slide, so here, this is the American Association for the Advancement of the Science in their AI policy. In January 2023, that they mentioned that the cannot be used in the work on the figures. But in the 2023, in the same journal, Association AI policy that they mentioned that they can use AI assistant technology should be provided in the cover letter and the acknowledgement. So you can see while policies have lot of variabilities and they are evolving rapidly. In the next slide, so whether we can use the AI for the author or co-author. So the Committee on Publication Ethics, they mentioned that AI tools cannot meet the requirement for the authorship as they cannot take responsibility for the submitted work. Okay, authors are fully responsible for the content of their manuscript. And next slide. So under next slide, I'm going to discuss how using generative AI in your writing. What are the best practices? If you use generative AI to edit your tone, format of your drafts, okay, please consult your specific journal, publisher, and the funder guidelines. Okay, so the policies are different from publishers and the funder guidelines. Be prepared to describe in the acknowledgement and the method section. Most of the IEEE, Elsevier, so those kind of journal that they mention that you should have to describe in the acknowledgement and method section. And save your original draft prompts and the AI outputs. And another thing that the generative AI to gather background information for your draft, okay? Avoiding citing that the large language model test word for word in your writing. So that's the thing. Instead, verifying your information that from the reliable resources and cite those instead. Okay, so those are the best practices that you can use generative AI when you are writing your manuscript. And then next slide that I'm going to discuss about, now there are translations. If you use generative AI now used for the translated your work on your own test. Okay, so they are also consult the specific journal publisher and be prepared to describe your use in the acknowledgement and the method section and follow the citation style guidelines. So there are specific guidelines given by, so follow those citations guidelines. And the next slide that next slide, please. So what are the elements that reporting your use of AI is very important for publisher, and it is publisher is asking about this. So, but with your awareness, you can plan ahead by documenting your AI use. Okay, so you should have to document tool name and the version, time, test and the screenshot, generated test responses, and follow-up queries and the responses. Those kind of elements is better to document, okay, when you are using AI tools for the research. Next slide. So there are a lot of guidelines that they are mentioning for the test. How can we use for the research manuscript? For the images that the large or most of the publishers will not accept the figures and images that have been generated by the AI. So this is the best example. Okay, in this journal that the Forensics in Cell and Development Biology in February, in this author that they generated this image using GenAI, but later that the publisher identified this one and then retracted. Okay, so most of the journal, when you are that nowadays that they will not accept a generated AI created images. So time to time that you should have to check your journal when you want to create some images using generative AI. It's best practices to check the journal and the publisher guidelines. And the next slide, please. Peer review. In the next slide, I'm going to discuss about the peer review process. So most of the researchers that we are volunteering in reviewing some of the journals manuscript. Okay, so most of the publishers, so you can see when you are reviewing some manuscript in the Elsevier or IEEE, now they are providing confidentiality agreement. Okay, so consult your publisher and the funder confidentiality agreement. So AI use is prohibited by many publishers and grant organization like NIH, DSF, Wellcome Trust, DFG. Most of the funding organization, they are not accepted that it is prohibited to use the generative AI for the peer review process. Next slide. So and this is the now I discussed that lot of the publishers and the journals, they have different guidelines. So this is Kangaroo Project standardization. This is the partnership between the publishers, including Elsevier, Springer, Nature, and Wiley. Okay, so they group of them are released their guideline in August 2024, which will be updated annually. So I'll ask all of you aware of this one. So then this one, they will provide some publication guidelines that how we can use generative AI. So basically there are a lot of tools there, but best practices is very important when we are using generative AI in the research domain. Yes, thank you. Yes, Professor Priyan.
Thank you, Dr. Pubudu. It's really interesting and quite illuminating. Now one of the key topics that you put on all of us is about ethical consideration. What are those and what are the implications? Let's ask Dr. Asitha Bandaranayake. Dr. Asitha, can you tell us about the ethical considerations? How do you think that will affect our education and the graduates we produce, especially the graduates we produce in the university systems? Over to you, Dr. Asitha.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Priyan. Actually, we have already heard a lot about the ethical consideration, ethical concerns under various topics. So what I'm going to do is to kind of put them into perspective, take all together and put them into perspective, as well as ask certain questions that can make us think about the implications of these things. So that's what I will be trying to do in the next few slides. Just to start with, this is AI generated image, which actually showcase some of the concerns that we will talk about. So moving on, the main topics of in my speech is categorized under looking at limitation and dangers. This is the main part, because when you get people talking about ethical considerations, we can separate them into the limitations part and the warnings that you get about the ethical considerations and the academic and the human integrity. So I'll separate those two out to ensure that we have the clear understanding on that one, and very quickly look at the purpose of our education, where we talk about outcome-based education, as well as future of education. Where are we going in the bigger scheme of things? Okay, so moving on, let's start with the limitations and dangers. So the first thing, and one of the things that you saw earlier image as well, one of the key aspects of AI, and especially generative AI, what we see is the accuracy and the bias. Now, what we need to understand, it's the AI generated content is actually data dependent. So most of this data is from the Western world, from US and Europe. And as we saw in the first image that I showed, we had a Caucasian people, because that's, if you ask any image to be created, most of the time you get with Caucasian people. Then I asked ChatGPT to create an image with these ethical concerns in Sri Lanka, and you get different types of images. You get one in the left with a combination. It might look like Sri Lankan, probably. The other one looks more like probably South India or upcountry. So you get different types of biases in our thing. So we have to be very careful, be aware of these biases that are available. Now, in pictures, that might be very clear to you, but in the written data, it might not be so obvious. So we have to understand, especially the socio-cultural implication that might that it leads to, because if you generate content or text mainly without really having the proper context, we might run into this other cultural implications as well. right? So we have to be very careful about that. The second part is the accuracy. Now, with respect to the text and people, we might not see this very clearly, but especially when you ask images to include text, you see how many inaccuracies there are, right? Because this is generative stuff. So we need to understand the same things are possible in your text generation as well, which we might not see. But this is clear, so that like if it's this prevalent in images, we need to understand that is the same. If it can be there in other generative stuff as well, right? So we have to be aware of this accuracy and bias. Next one, please. Right. The next, the main thing that people ask is the lack of transparency. Like, can we trust this content that is created? And who's accountable? Now, if you use generated AI, what is the accountability that you have, right? It's because it seems like coming from a black box. You can't explain how it is happening. It's a question, the explainability of AI and explainability of generative AI. So there's no accountability. Of course, the person who's using it and producing and presenting has to take the accountability of that one. And the trust. Once you start using this everywhere, like, is it that we are controlling the AI or AI is controlling us, right? So this is what the next thing that we need to be aware of. The next. Right? And we talked about data privacy and security, about when we are using data, about the informed consent. We need to, if we are using student data, we have to get their consent to use this data and to ensure that data is not released or could be used by others. So we need to use things like anonymization in these things. Next one. Right. And one of the key aspects that people are mentioning is the diminished critical thinking with over-reliance on AI, right? So the image in the left, we can see people, the students become bots and using the critical thinking. But about a classroom 50 years ago, whether the critical thinking has been in our education, or we have been like robots for the last century of education, where we go for rote learning with or without AI, it's actually something that we have to think about. Can we use generative AI actually to change this rote learning that we have had for centuries in our education and do something entirely different, as Roshan mentioned earlier? Next one, Roshan. Right. And over-reliance, we have seen so many of, people without even, realizing what we are doing, like, these papers which are retracted, which has even other component that is generated by AI that people are using, even without looking at what they are putting. Like, so if you're using to that level, of course, we are going to have issues. So we need to be aware of that. Next. And one of the key things that was asked, and being asked is, who has the ownership? As of now, it does not belong to anyone because it's a generated one. You say that we can use it. Whether you can copyright or not depends on different publishers, different people as of now, right? As mentioned, the criteria is different in different publishers. It keeps changing. So whether you can acknowledge, whether you put, of course, we are not putting them as authors anymore. At the beginning, it was also considered. So these things are evolving as we go. So we need to look at how it evolves as we go. Next one. Now, moving on to the integrity. Now, this is actually what's the main concern when we talk about academic or using generative AI in higher education or education. This is the question that you get. How can I stop my students from using Gen AI? Right? How can I catch them doing it? right? So as Roshan mentioned earlier, a few people, as we have seen already, there are tools to do it and all that, right? Now, the question is, what are we really trying to achieve by this one, right? Because are we trying to do the same things that we did earlier in our education with generative AI? So moving on, next one, right? So this thing about, the original content or the ghostwriting, meaning using generative AI for writing, and also called plagiarism, whether this actually currently does not fall under plagiarism, because it's kind of called, it's not somebody else's thing, but there are thoughts of whether to include ghostwriting into plagiarism. So these concerns are there in all places, but they are all in an evolving state as of now. Next one. And you see a lot of in academic institutes, people, lecturers are using tools to detect these things, and also doing it wrongly. As one case of this ChatGPT scandal, where a professor actually fails falsely, thinking that if they have used ChatGPT to generate there when they had not, right? So these possible problems are also there. Next. Right. So this brings us to the question of, what is the purpose of our education, right? So I'm not going to go into that. This is a very big discussion, of course, but just looking at our main focus probably doesn't have to be, but one of our key focuses, the job market or the industry needs or the employable graduate, right? And if you look at from the industry point of view, what we see is getting things done accurately, quickly, and cheaply, right? And this is one of the key things. So this actually contradicts a lot with this previous method of assessments, saying, how did you do it? Because the industry, or when you want to get things done, more often than not, you don't really care. Like, for example, if you take the data from this Copilot from GitHub, the time that takes for a software engineer to actually do the coding with the assistance of the AI assistants is actually reduces by 55%, right? So now, if you can get that done, why would anybody object to that one if it's even more accurate? Now, like, generating images, like if a human takes 5 hours to generate image and cost $150, whereas you can generate it with generative AI, which costs 8 cents and takes less than 1 minute, why would you object to that one, right? Now, we need to understand what is our education and what's the world is looking for, what's the industry is looking for, what's the rest of the world is looking for, right? So if there's going to be a mismatch, our graduates are going to be completely unemployable in the future, right? Next one. Right. And for example, even this is from Vishaka shared this earlier, one of the responses from industry, like, ideal candidate may use ChatGPT effectively, but should not completely rely on it. He or she should be able to explain every line of code written. Now, some actually have this one, but my question for them would be Roshan, right? Things like, 𝗍𝗀, like, you can go and get data and create, calculate z-score or z-score, z-score in Excel. Do you know how to calculate yourself? I don't remember that, but I can calculate a z-score. I can calculate standard deviation. Should I know how to do that? I have learned it previously. Should I know it now? Well, I have the tool. If it's accurate, why should I go into the trouble of doing it one by one myself, right? So this is something that we need to understand. If you can use generative AI, right, for the purpose, for the outcome, how much of that should we understand? Okay, Roshan. So last slide, right? The future of education. I'm not going to go into the a lot of details, but what we need to understand, in a large scale of things, the grand scheme of things, we are looking at the evolution in humans. We are the tiny speck in the entire evolution timeline, right? And as Charles Darwin said, it is not the strongest or the most intelligent who will survive, but those who can best manage change. So that is what we need to understand with generative AI and the changes that are coming in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Asitha, for your very insightful answer, covering up along to bringing opportunities and challenges, and even through complications at last, and also giving away how it should be taken up. So moving forward, we will be taking up the questions, some of the questions at the end. For now, we will be moving to the next round of discussions. It's totally about policy implications. Now we listened to some challenges and opportunities. Now we thought of moving to the round 2. It's totally about policy principles. So we will start from a general way, where we will be taking up major stakeholders like students, teachers, and academic administrators of any higher education institutions. So let me ask the question to Vishaka ma'am. Actually, she was stressing out that the general policies starting from generative AI in education and research by UNESCO. And also she was mentioning about equality versus equity. Let me ask Vishaka ma'am, what the general objective of policies for generative AI in education should be? What do you mean?
Thank you, Professor Priyan. You actually, when we talk about general objectives of policies, there were quite a large number of questions also asking, why do we need policies? Why do we need those? And if we need those, who should be the authority to come up with those? As I said at the beginning, the policy vacuums are what would really pave the way for policies. So in order to have a vacuum, we need to be using this. We need to be making sure that we look at this. As you said, I was talking about various guidelines. Roshan, if you could move to the next slide. I like this Russell Group principle, which really highlighted, I believe, my belief of where it should be. Appropriate adaptations to teaching and assessment methods will vary by university and discipline. And protecting this autonomy is vital. This is exactly what it is, right? When we look at, we would be having different things. I mean, there were questions about the availability of resources, all that. So we should be able to harness all what we can do in doing that. Some of the examples, some of the best practices we talk about may not be possible in certain disciplines, but we need to make sure that the policies that we come up with should make room for all of us to do whatever we can and have that equity. And all staff who support student learning should be empowered to design teaching sessions, materials, and assessment that incorporate the creative use of generative AI tools where appropriate. That is important, and we probably would be discussing also, I mean, where can you include it? Should it only be in a computer science curriculum or a STEM curriculum, or can it go to humanities? We believe that there is room for everybody to do that, but that will have to come from the autonomy that is given to the faculties, the departments, the disciplines. And today, professional bodies also are getting interested in this. And as they highlighted, professional bodies will also have an important role in supporting universities to adopt their practices, particularly in relation to the accreditation. Asitha talked about the world of work requiring the graduate to be ready with this. So we need to make sure that we work in collaboration with the relevant professional bodies. Roshan, the next slide. Yeah, so I believe that these guiding principles need to foster collaboration, not just among the learner and the teacher, but also with industry, with the other professional bodies, the academia elsewhere, all that is needed. And continuous learning is important, right? As Asitha said, and today, if you ask, the industry or the employer wants to get the things done in the fastest possible way, the most accurate as well. So in doing so, the graduate we produce, if they are not comfortable in using the tools available, they probably would not have the best chance. So we need to make sure that we educate today's undergraduate who would be tomorrow's professional to be in that era. I really like this ensure equity and inclusion because that is important. And there was a question asking, do you think that we have the same opportunities? Yes, I believe, because the requirements are very, if I would say, soft oriented. You don't need the machineries to generate this so much. You need the intellectual thinking, intellectual capacity. And the question on, will this really not give us a chance to generate new knowledge and all that? We probably thought the same when people started using the calculator, right? I'm not that old to think about it, but if you think about it, every time a new tool came, we had this dilemma: what would be the future? And with GenAI, the various tools that are coming, I think that would still be the same. We would be able to reap the benefits to provide more equitable, included access. But last but not least, we need to remember who we are. As I said, the faculties, the disciplines would have that. And also the student who comes to us are non-native English speakers. So how would we adopt these technologies? All these are important. And tomorrow, I hope, would be brighter with us being able to use these new tools to make sure that we are collaborating, we are promoting continuous learning, and more than anything else, providing an equitable, included education. Over to you, Priyan.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. For now, let me think about now. See, Vishaka ma'am was talking about general objectives and policies, referring few documents. Now, when we think about the guidelines or principle for students, especially there are a lot of questions coming from the other end from students. Let me call upon Dr. Thushari to say something on because she was talking about learning. Shari, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Priyan, for giving me this opportunity to talk about it. So when it comes to the guideline on how to use generative AI in education tools, what is this generative AI tool? It is not educational enhanced. It's not a replacement for an educator. It is a tool which is used for the enhancement of our education. So that must be very clear. It's not another machine which generates any answer for your questions, but it's you who is controlling these tools. When it comes to the generative AI tools, so for sure, it is for our development of critical thinking and innovative ideas, encouraging a different way of looking at the same problem. So basically developing the skills required for tomorrow's world. And another aspect that we need to look into the human oversight. So these are tools, generative AI tools. Of course, they can make errors. So you might have observed, they say that the ChatGPT makes mistakes. So it's our duty to responsibly use this. And at the same time, we need to make sure that whatever the content generated from these tools are validated. So it's you, finally, you are the one who is going to get the benefit from this generative AI tool. So our involvement, even the expertise involvement in identifying the content and validation of those content generated. And also remember that as students, so we have accountability for our job. It is who we are going to benefit from these courses, programs, whatever you have registered for. So we have learning outcomes to be met. So these outcomes we need to somehow achieve. We need to get enough knowledge and enough understanding for the skills, knowledge, plus other abilities. So it's us, not the tool. So if you are using tool instead of you, so definitely you need to rethink what you are doing. And the other point is that the transparency. So when we cite something, when we get from anything, from any generative AI tool, so you better give the credit to the tool. So it's not your generation answer, but it's the assisted tools answer. So it is important for us to indicate the usage policies, and even at the university level, even other institutions, they have incorporated already the plagiarism rule. So whatever the assignment you are doing, you are taking knowledge from other sources, you have to cite and give the credit to the original authors. So that is, if that is violated, definitely you will be punished for the plagiarism problem. So that is similar here as well. GenAI is also another source that you use to get more and more information, plus more advanced work, intelligent work human can support. So then give the academic integrity and keep the academic integrity the same as honesty. So that is pretty important. It is not coming your cheap model. So it's very expensive. So academic honesty, and also maintain the good reputation of the work. And when it comes to the responsible use, so you should be well aware that it's not kind of like generated content can be copied and pasted into your assignment and hand it over after putting your name in something as a student. So, but you do need to make sure that you have balancing the learning expectation. So in this learning environment, plus the support of these automated generated content. And overall, so these set of guidelines will definitely put our students into a kind of right direction. So in case you need it, you can get the assistance, but at the same time, when you get the assistance, you should give the right credibility, and your content developed will not be rejected. So no need to worry about what it should be and what if I'm not the person who detected this one. So yeah. That's all I want to share with you under this, and thank you very much. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you. And now I think Dr. Menaka is looking at, she also wanted to say something on regard to students. Dr. Menaka?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Priyan. To add on to what Dr. Thushari was highlighting, I would like to add some aspects. Sorry, you have to move the slide, please. Yeah, okay, right, thank you. So to add on to what Dr. Thushari was highlighting, I would like to add some aspects that students need to consciously adhere to when they're using GenAI tools, because responsibility and accountability of the work done is an aspect that we all need to look at very seriously. Policies are there, regulations are there, but when we have the accountability and we have the responsibility of what we are doing for the ethical aspects, then we can be sure that we are doing something really good work. So when it comes to the students, the use of generative AI tools responsibly, only as supplements, as it was highlighted many times, it is not going to be it's only as a supplement for traditional learning, but not as a replacement. Then AI can provide valuable insights and assistance. It's essential to engage in critical and thinking and problem solving independently. If I take an example, for final year research projects, GenAI can help gather information and suggest ideas, but the students should need to do the design and conduct their own analysis, and they need to draw the conclusions. So then only they can claim it that they have used the GenAI while acknowledging it, but they have gone through the process. So that is consciously they are doing what they are supposed to do. The ethical usage is highlighted to a great extent, and we need to maintain the academic integrity by avoiding plagiarism. So we need to acknowledge the work that is being generated through these tools, because we need to cite the sources as discussed earlier, respecting intellectual property rights. Then again, students need to be very cautious about information they share with GenAI tools, and any AI tool actually, because we need to protect the privacy as well as integrity without becoming over-reliant on these tools. So best practices such as using AI tools that comply with data protection regulations and setting limits on AI usage will ensure balanced learning with GenAI. So all these aspects are clearly stated in policy documents, the implications that we need to adhere, and we need to consciously decide on what we are doing, because ultimately we are the ones who are going to be responsible if we create something and submit that for evaluations. Next slide, please. Since much was discussed on principles and usage and the policies, I'm not going to talk about much. These aspects are also taken from higher educational institution policy guidelines. There I want to highlight one thing. So it says, higher education institutes where students were asked to write a narrative on how and why GenAI is used. So they need to tell how they used and why they used to reduce the time, because they do, I mean, because of the time lapse, because of the stress, or whatever the aspects, they need to explain why they have used this and how they have used it. So in that case, when you give a statement like that, it totally transfers the entire responsibility to the user. So I would like to emphasize that you have to consciously use GenAI tools, taking the sole responsibility of how you use it. So that is the main point that I want to highlight, that when you use these tools, it is your total responsibility, that you cannot claim at any time that this was generated by the tools, so I'm not responsible. It is not the case. So we have to use these tools in a very conscious manner. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks,
Over.
Dr. Menaka. It's really interesting that you're able to share something related to learning. And now, actually, we were talking about the students and students level principles, what we can think about. Guiding principles for academic administrators, especially we call it as academic administrators. To talk about this, I invite Professor Nuwan. Over to you, Nuwan.
Thank you, Professor Priyan. Yeah. So if you can go to the slide deck, the next one. I'll actually tell you some examples of how GenAI can help in the universities. So some of these are obvious. So if you take administrative divisions in the university, the current operations, the IT solutions that are used, so there can be full-blown IT solutions, or sometimes many systems that are used, and we may need to integrate using different applications, but all of these things can be streamlined using this GenAI that is coming up. And one of the things universities are really looking at, even in states and possibly more in non-state universities, is this retention of students. Like sometimes you have universities where we get a wide range of students with different abilities, and we need to ensure that we have data-driven analytics to see how the students are performing. And these tools can also, so these are some of the use cases where we can use. So students need support, and as mentioned in some of the other examples, it's very difficult to give one-to-one human level support when you have large number of students. So we have seen chatbots, virtual assistants supporting and then coming in. And even state universities do have outreach programs. And we have seen one of the strongest points when it comes to GenAI is like it is able to create artifacts. Of course, it has to be done in a human-centered way, where there's a human who validates the generated output. It could be images, or it could be content. So that could be for content creation, event planning. And of course, in most universities, like we do have resource allocation constraints. And this is also a place where GenAI can come in. So talking about policies, Priyan, let me just touch on some other aspects in the next slide. So I think Menaka talked about a lot about, sorry, the slide before this. So she talked about, the next slide, please. Yeah, so I think things related to data privacy and protection, Menaka touched on. So these are applicable when it comes to setting up policies for administrators. As she mentioned, administrators or anyone who is using an AI system should know what kind of data can be used with these systems. So if you actually use confidential data, we know that these systems can use those confidential data for training. And then basically they will be in public domain. And we should not do that kind of thing. And so there had to be proper policies that look into those aspects. And sometimes organizations will develop their own AI solutions. And when data sets are used, so maybe like we want to develop a predictive model where we kind of predict how students are going to do in their studies, you need to have well-represented data, and you should also have data that is selected that doesn't have any personally identified content. But I think those are things that we talked about. But these last 2 points are very important. I strongly believe this GenAI movement that actually started up with this, ChatGPT coming up in November 22 is a bit like the moment that we had when everyone rushed into online learning during COVID. So when COVID actually hit us, all universities, all educational institutes, including schools, went into what we call this online Zoom kind of thing. And there were a lot of things that we had to learn, and we were very successful in learning those things. Now, the difference is in GenAI, things are moving so rapidly. So what you have, the tools that we have today, for example, ChatGPT-4 can recognize images. It can interpret images, but that was not there 3-4 months ago. So these tools are evolving rapidly, and we need to have continuous learning and professional programs. So I'm really happy to know that there are a lot of programs that are there in various universities where academics take the lead and then have a lot of knowledge dissemination sessions. So Learn is also doing that. So I think that's very vital for university administrators as well. So academics also need to be in touch, and we need to have policies that talk about continuous learning, professional development, and these have to be continuous. Now, if you think about the administrators that are there in the universities, they are like, let's say, somewhat similar to office workers that are there in the corporate sector in terms of what they have to do. So typically someone who's using IT in an office, I mean, we generally teach them about the office packages, PowerPoint, Excel, Word. Now, someone who has learned Excel, PowerPoint, Word, even if they have learned it 15 years ago, those skills are still applicable now. But when it comes to GenAI tools, what we learn today will be obsolete maybe in 2-3 months in the future. So there are so many tools coming up. And if you want our administrators and also others to be aware of these tools, the policy guidelines should include continuous training and professional development. And in cases where there are specific systems in place in a university or any other organization, there has to be proper training on how these systems should be used. So I think these are some of the aspects that should be as part of policy guidelines for administrators in a university. Over to you, Professor Priyan.
Thank you, Professor Nuwan. Actually, very insightful. Is as an academic administration, you were thinking about it, how this can be adapted. Now, actually, we got Professor Ashoka Karunaananda here, one of the senior member in the panel, as well as who has started this AI since when AI was actually started in this kind of things years back in Sri Lanka. One of the initiative person also in for that. And we would like to ask, I would like to ask a question actually, as what kind of principal guidelines you would suggest or you would provide for the educators or academics over here, on this community over here. Over to you, Professor Ashoka.
Okay, thank you, Professor Priyan. Sorry, my slides are not moving.
Okay.
All right, it's coming. Okay, thank you. Okay, actually, thanks for this important question about this educators and academics, actually, when they are really considering in our AI initiative, their influence is very high. So in this sense, actually, now we all know that AI has surpassed at the moment human capabilities in terms of efficiency, then the accuracy, reaction time, data volume handling, and all incomplete information, noisy information, which are really very difficult tasks for human being due to biological reasons, because we may be knowing algorithms, but we cannot execute the algorithm in the accurate manner and fast. So therefore, actually, humanity cannot afford to reject the integration of AI into our lives. So then without AI, we are not in a position to continue in our life in the future. So that is very important and valid reason to tell that why AI is so important for us. So as we know, actually, among other technologies, disciplines, education is responsible for development of cognitive capabilities of the student. So like that, we say retention power, thinking, understanding, creativity, and so on. So then actually, this is our role as academics. Then we should be responsible for developing this part with our student. So then when you look at this thing as a whole, so then our role, use of GenAI to education is more crucial than introducing GenAI into some other area like transportation, health, or agriculture, whatever. Because here we are playing with the brains of the students. So then from educational policy viewpoint, in this case, our academics and educated should be mindful of the following points related to towards policy development in this area. There's one thing actually, when integrating GenAI into education, we have to ensure the enhancement of student cognitive capabilities through that GenAI initiatives. So then if GenAI initiatives are not promoting the student thinking power, retention, understanding, creativity, and so on, so then we have to be cautious about that point. That's one point we have to highlight, because there should be GenAI tools. There is no any education psychological basis or foundation to ensure enhancement of cognitive capabilities. A second point I would like to highlight is when you think of the curriculum design in comparison with our traditional practices of curriculum design, we have to be mindful the delivery methods, the assessment. So then the learning activities for students, that kind of things related to our normal template of curriculum design should be revised actually. When you go for this GenAI initiatives, our teaching method may be different, assessment method may be different, then learning activities that we have to introduce to students will be different. So otherwise, actually using GenAI, they can do something totally unacceptable. And another important point is that actually when you think of use of GenAI for education sector, actually use of the foreign toolkits or whatever then others people have developed. So that is not adequate actually. In the context of research also, we have to give some priority for GenAI related research. So then we should not be just users of GenAI, but the researchers in the area of GenAI. So that is also important thing. So with this background, actually my key points are, so our GenAI initiatives should ensure students' cognitive capability development, then educators should look into that matter. And, there should be some mechanism check time to time whether that is development is taking place or not. Other thing is the crucial thing and also difficult. We have a lot of hard work when you are designing the curriculum. Little amendments and the suggestions should be required according to this GenAI initiative. The last point is the research in GenAI. So this is what I basically pursue as what educators and academics should consider when introducing GenAI. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ashoka, for your valuable insights regarding as a senior academia in the system, as well as to advise the academic and the educators with regard to these principles. Of course, what you have said is correct. Now, moving towards the last segment of this policy discussions, we will be looking at the research perspective, actually. Policy implementation. We would like to hear from Dr. Pubudu. She's working in non-Sri Lankan institution, higher education institution from Germany. Pubudu, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Professor Priyan. So actually, I'm currently working as TU Dresden, Germany. So under there that I involved some workshop and also policy development of the Faculty of Computing in the TU Dresden. So I will discuss some of what kind of research policies that German and the EU countries are following. Okay, go to the next slide. So most of the university and the higher institute in the Europe that in German mainly they focus on the German Research Foundation. So there are a lot of guidelines that they are publishing for the test and the image creation. So most of the universities institute, they are following this DFG guidelines, as well as Stand-in Conference of the Minister of Education and Cultural Affairs recently published one paper for the large language models in January 2024. And also they discuss about how the classroom research and the education policy discussion. And also the European guideline for the AI and research recently that the European Parliament also there's a that they discuss about and they point another act number 28B for especially for the AI Act. So most of the universities that they are following this guideline, and some experts they use some different guidelines and policies they developed. Okay, so those guidelines that mainly it's contained about the scope and the purposes and objectives and the stakeholder engagement. For the research, there are different kinds of stakeholders are there, researchers, research organizations, and research funding organizations. Okay, and how the ethical consideration and the data management and the security and the intellectual property rights and training. So those are the main things, those guidelines and the policies are discussed. Okay, so the next slide, please. Okay, so in those guidelines that they provide some recommendations for the researchers. Okay, so remain ultimately responsible for the scientific output. Researchers are accountable for the integrity of the content, okay, generated by you with the support of the AI tool. And next one, use generative AI transparently. In the first speech also that I discussed, it should be transparent. Okay, researchers to be transparent, detail which generative AI tools have been used, okay, in their research process. And pay particular attention to the issue related privacy, confidentiality, and intellectual property rights when sharing sensitive information with the AI tools. Researchers remain mindful that generated or uploaded input, text, data, prompts, images could be used for other purposes, such as training AI models. Okay, so therefore they protect unpublished sensitive work by taking care not to upload into the online AI system. So they are mainly focused on the privacy, confidentiality of their data. And when using generative AI, respect applicable national, European and international policies. So mainly in the Europe GDPR policy. Okay, so when in the policies that mainly focus on that and continuously learn. In Ms. Vishaka madam also mentioned that continuously learn is very important. For as a researcher also continuously learn how to use generative AI tools is very important. So those are the recommendations for the researchers. Okay, so the next slide, I will discuss about the recommendation for the research organizations. Okay, so research organization, institute, and the universities, they mainly must provide guide and support the responsible use of generative AI in the research activities. In my case, now as a postdoctoral researcher, I got a lot of workshops provided by the graduate academies and the digital learning. So they must promote, guide, and support for the responsible use, actively monitor the development and the use of generative AI system, and refer and so integrate these AI guidelines into their general research and guidelines for good research practice and ethics. Okay, so those kind of things. So whenever possible and necessary, and they mentioned that it's better to implement locally hosted cloud-based generative AI tools that they govern themselves. Okay, because this enable their employees to feed their scientific data into the tool that ensure the data protection and the confidentiality. Okay, so the next one, the main stakeholder for the research is the research that the funding organizations. Okay, so the next slide, please. Yes, next slide. Yes, sorry, the previous slide. Sorry, next, the research this is the previous slide, please. Sorry. Yes. Recommendation for the research funding organizations. Okay, so the funding organization must have to provide that the promote and guide, and then it should be more practical way that they should have to provide for the promote and support for the responsible and generative AI in research. Okay, so they maintain and get actively involved in the fast evolving generative AI landscapes. So that's the main thing that they provide, recommendation for the researchers, research organizations, and the funding organizations. Yes, next slide. Yes, so they review the promote and support and request transparency from the funding application on their use of generative AI, and monitor and get actively involved. Next slide, please. So that's the European and the German recommendation for the DFG and other guidelines, European guidelines. So this is the one that I got from the Australian universities. Okay, so this is the framework that they propose for the generative AI in the research. Okay, so in here you can see that the element context. So all these things should be they discuss in the tiered architecture. So National Research Policy Guideline, National Human Research Policy Guidelines, and the standard for the other degree requirements. Okay, so those are coming to the university policy. So the national policies, national human research policies should be integrated into the university level policy and the research ethics framework. And then you can see it's developed the development phase. Okay, and after that, the implementation phase, that the communication and the engagement strategy should be there. Okay, and training and the education strategy must be in the policy, and infrastructure and the procedural considerations. Okay, so then we can create a good university framework for the responsible and the best usage of the generative AI in the research. So those are the international perspective for the how to create what kind of policies for the generative AI in research. Okay, so thank you.
Thanks, Pubudu, for a long explanation with bringing up some frameworks as well at the end. Now, actually, Dr. Asitha is waiting to take up two questions from the audience, which seems like it's really important for policy. Dr. Asitha, over to you.
Yeah, I think we have discussed a lot of policies and all that. So I think there's a general concern and all that. So I would like to actually ask one of the questions here, which Nuwan has also answered. So there's one question like how to address the loss of creativity, loss of empathy, loss of competitiveness with AI. Since this is one of the misconception or representations, I guess. So let me ask Professor Roshan, what do you think about this question, actually?
Yeah, in fact, I also believe it's some misconception. In fact, like there's enough. There are thoughts on both sides. There are both, would say, belief. But I am on the side where I believe these tools and the technology is enabling all this bata list, creativity and the list, right? The whole list of concerns that usually I have. So obviously the tools themselves might not be supporting some of them, like for example, the ethical consideration or the concerns we had, or the fairness we have, and so on. However, as of now, we are talking about bringing the tools and the people, human in the loop, as we call it, into the picture. And therefore, for now, human obviously had to come in and take the responsibility and do it. But if the concerns are just about the tool, if the tool is not doing a certain thing, let's say it's not still accurate, or it's still not, it is having bias and so on. So those are obviously coming from where it is trained, the human generated content. And so that's going to be addressed, if it could be addressed in the sense, like, for example, like look at how the 𝗙𝗵𝗂𝕗𝕗 platform is enabling education, stopping directly answering questions to students and so on. So you can go and look at those. And in terms of creativity, even areas like humanities, you can, or social sciences, you can go and look at the number of studies that are done. In fact, like proper empirical studies that are done recently to show that it improves. But even if you take just my own perspective, like, okay, I like to draw, for example, but I didn't develop that skill from day one. But I have ideas. What do I do? Now I can give these ideas to a tool, and the tool can draw from it, right? So just the output. But then the idea coming from me, I have the ideas. I know how to do. I know what I want, but I didn't develop the skill of drawing. So that's an example. Music, another example. So I can consider a lot of examples. In the interest of time, I'll stop there. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Shan and Dr. Asitha. Actually, we can, as we know, that this is a very emerging topic and we can talk hours and hours. Actually, what I addressed here so far is like kind of a understanding of what we did. So actually, to both of you, I mean, since you both of you are serving as academic members in the University of Peradeniya, I see that at University of Peradeniya, they have taken some initiatives of developing AI guidelines and enhancing the learning environment. Let us listen from both of you about those insights, and audiences would like to hear such things, obviously. Over to you both.
Okay, so thanks, Professor Priyan. So yeah, so we have actually in Peradeniya, we started this artificial intelligence forums for academics. Actually, it's open for anybody around in the country. So we initiated this guideline. So you'll see that there's a guide. This is called a guideline for adapting artificial intelligence for academics and administrative work at University of Peradeniya. We are actually calling it guiding principles more than guide. So, since Roshan is actually taking the lead in this one, let me ask Roshan. Roshan, why are we going with guidelines or guiding principles rather than policies?
Okay, so obviously for good reasons. In fact, there were some questions about it earlier as well, which we answered on the by our text earlier. Several questions related to whether we need a guideline, whether we need a principle, like whether we need like a policy, right? So obviously, as you know, policy is more formal, and guidelines are very loose, like in the sense it's flexible. So therefore we are more towards the reason being like things like generative AI, like it was already highlighted by many others during the discussion. It is changing. It keeps changing so fast, and therefore the best option is to keep it flexible, keep it moving. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is the changes and the requirement. Like if you're setting up policies, they are more like formal, and therefore everyone has to follow it to the letter. But however, when it is a guiding principle, the idea is it's more like fundamental, at the same time flexible, right? So we are only looking at how we can enable educators, students, and also administrators to have a set of principles or a set of foundation. So to target that was all things like that are already highlighted earlier. For example, Ms. Vishaka also highlighted things like the collaboration and the openness and inclusion. So these aspects. So we want to make sure these aspects are included into foundation, and using the foundation, humanities, for instance, will have a certain set of policies requirement. If you take engineering, for instance, might have something else. Health sciences will have something else, or healthcare will have something else. So therefore, the foundation, although the foundation is the same, the specific details of the letter-to-letter or the word-to-word policies are different. So that is the whole idea of putting like a common foundation. Like you said, Asitha, we are calling it the guiding principle.
Yeah.
So, and also I see that you are sharing the document. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Roshan. So I'll just show what you mentioned. So as Roshan mentioned, there was a lot of questions about about the policies and the guidelines on that. So what we have done here is to create a kind of a broader document. One is to actually educate anybody. So for example, what is this AI? What can you do? How can it support? What are the things that it can do? How it can support? What are the impact on education, the considerations, ethical considerations, limitations, and what are the things like, for example, let's say, ensuring equity and inclusion, you have a guideline, and what are the policies that you can create from it. So we are giving a very broad idea for anybody to look at this. So for promoting continuous learning, what are the guidelines and how can you come up with policies on this one? I'm not going to go into details of this one, but it's just and then we have general guidelines which can be made to policies. Again, as Roshan said, we are not going to tell anybody these are the policies that you should come up with. This is just about educating people and letting them know what are the possibilities and what are the things that they should look at. For example, if you look at students, a perspective, what are the possibilities and what are the type of policies that you can come up with. So we have done it for students, for lecturers, for administrators and all that. So let's say administrators can come and actually look at this one and come to look at what type of policies should be come up. So that's the guideline that we have come up with, which can be used by anybody to come up with the policy. So I'll stop at that, Priyan. Over to you.
Really interesting. As educators, academic institution, part of, I'm also part of another institution where I'm be a kind of an administrative officer, where we see we should also think about similar kind of approach, developing such kind of documents or guidelines, especially the guidelines, as you said, the meaning of guidelines, Roshan, are really thoughtful. So, which comes with that note, we actually coming to the last part of our webinar. For the audience, the feedback form is now available, will be available after the post-webinar, as a post-webinar. Please use the provided link to share your feedback. Obviously, we need feedbacks from the audience. We have answered more than 32 questions, actually. That's it's like 90 minutes, actually. If we try to answer each and anything, around 1.5 hours we saved. We will also send a post-event report and additional resources to all participants who registered for today's webinar. Then still some of you might have missed some of the important parts. especially Vishaka members sharing so many QRs and things. So we will be sharing those to all the registered participants today. We now come to the conclusion. So throughout our session, we have gathered foundational knowledge on establishing an AI and generative AI learning environment. We have also explored the opportunities and challenges that may arise with the implementation of related policies. I believe there are numerous takeaways for everyone here today. I once again thank the following organizing bodies: Sri Lanka Association for the Advancement of Science, IEEE Sri Lanka section, IEEE Computer Society Sri Lanka chapter, International Conference on Advanced Research in Computing, Lanka Education and Research Network for making this event success. On behalf of the organizing bodies, I would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to the resource panel for their enlightening and contribution to today. Please accept our virtual appreciation. First, Prof. Ashoka Karunananda. Slides move on. The slides have to be more virtual. Thank you, Prof. Yeah. Then Ms. Vishaka Nanayakkara.
Thank you.
Professor Roshan Ragel, who is initiated this. And then Dr. Asitha Bandaranayake, who put some fertilization at the end. And then Professor Nuwan, with a call, he just said, agree to come.
Thank you.
Dr. Thushari, even the same. Dr. Menaka Ranasinghe.
Thank you.
And Dr. KP and Jayasena, finally, the one from our ICRC, representing ICRC as well. And I need to give some special thanks to 𝗪𝕙𝕬𝕐 Tech Support team for their assistance throughout this webinar, and the graphic designer 𝗕𝗵𝗵𝗀𝕬𝕐 from Faculty of Computing of Sabaragama University, Sri Lanka, for making all these wonderful slides. And thank all other technical officers who belongs to Learn also to make this session without any delay. For the delay, be able to host at this moment. And with that, I'm signing off from this webinar. Thank you for joining us and have a good evening. Take care of yourself.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.